Now joining us is Greg Edwards. He was up for congressional race in the 7th District of Pennsylvania. And Greg, last time we talked, we were very, very hopeful. And I just thought you were such a great candidate. And as it turns out, you didn't win that race, of course, last week. But I wanted to have you on, one, to talk about the future, and two, to talk about what happened in the race. Because you had the most volunteers by far. You were super organized. You had a lot of the progressive movement behind you. So what happened in that race? Fill us in.
Well, I mean, almost a week ago to the day, we had an incredible campaign. We had hundreds of volunteers that ranged in age from 18 to 92, from all races, all walks of life. We outraised our opponents on both sides of the aisle with about 20,000 individual contributions that ranged in size about $35. And basically, Cenk, we were outspent by super PACs. We were outspent by 3-1. The D-Trip did a poll about a month ago, a little bit more than a month ago before we start running the field. They had us down at about 15%. Of course, we outperformed that poll. We ended up taking 26% of the vote. But what that poll did was it allowed the super PACs to weigh in. And so we were outspent by, these groups from the outside that weighed in for candidates of their choice. But I will say that we ran the best campaign, a historic campaign in the 7th Congressional District. And against all odds, we finished at third place, getting 11,521 votes, which is no small thing when the voter turnout in Pennsylvania was so astronomically low. 18% of Pennsylvanians voted across the board. That's really low out of 182,000 voters in this district.
So let's talk about the super PACs, because I remember that you had outraised your opponents, but if you're outraising them and I'm going to make up numbers here, you're at 225,000 and they're at 175. It isn't going to matter much if a super PAC comes in with $1 million and just swamps the race.
Absolutely.
So who were the super PACs?
So there was one group called No Labels. No Labels is an out-of-state PAC out of North Carolina that has very wealthy donors that really back conservative Democrats that are really against progressive policies, progressive platforms, and progressive candidates. And they ran negative mailers on me that were absolutely fictitious, thinking that they could sway voters through skewed information on negative mailers. And then, of course, we had Emily's List. And Emily's List is a corporate PAC and a super PAC. And they ran an IE on a woman running in the race, and that certainly tipped the scale in her favor. And I do believe that race, gender, part of our federal electoral process, as well as super PACs, played a critical role in the outcome of last week's primary election.
So Emily's List is an interesting one. So No Labels is easy. They're for conservative Democrats who are pro-corporations, pro-tax cuts for the rich. And they say, well, look, we don't hate ethnic minorities. Well, are you not merciful? Okay, all right, that's not interesting. So I know that that if they're in a primary, they're not gonna be supporting the progressive. Emily's List in Washington has a lot of street cred, right? They have a reputation of being progressive and fighting for women's rights, et cetera. Now, your record on women's rights is excellent, but what's your sense here? How is Emily's List making those decisions? Is it really based on who has the best record on the issues they care about, or is it based on something else?
Well, Cenk, interestingly enough, Emily's List has supported both quote unquote pro-life and pro-choice candidates, which is interesting. But if you look at what Emily's List gives to Black women, Black females versus white females, there's a stark difference. And they gave this candidate about $700,000 worth of free advertisement and then ran negative mailers against one of our opponents. And so, they certainly weighed in, put their thumb on the scale, and arguably as an extension of the D-Trip, they played a critical role in the outcome of the election.
Yeah, that's another great question. And so these are the things that we're exploring. And I have to be honest with you, I'm learning about a lot of the intricacies of this as we go through this process, right?
Mhm.
And uh, and so I didn't know how much those Washington groups are connected to the DCCC and how much they coordinate. Now, I don't know to what degree they're honest about it. My guess is if you ask them, they say, "Oh, no, no, what do you mean? We asked our supporters, right?" But it seems to me that they're pretty
Right.
much in lockstep, that whatever the Democratic Party says Emily's List does. So then wait, why am I giving money to Emily's List? Are they accomplishing the mission that they claim that they're going for? Or are they just another wing of the establishment and they not telling us that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that they will absolutely do once they step into a race is they will take that candidate, they will message the candidate, and they will control the candidate's platform. And that's really concerning. I mean, one of the things that we see is that super PACs absolutely are defining the destiny of democracy. If we don't do something about campaign finance reform immediately, it is ultimately going to impact democracy. And Emily's List is the part of that. If you look at their donors, interestingly enough, if you look at all other super PAC donors, Emily's List included, they all include very similar profiles of people, regardless of political affiliation.
Yeah, and I wanted to get a correct sense of scale. How much money did you raise overall for you didn't do super PACs, you didn't do corporate PACs.
Nope.
So
You know,
how much did you raise for your campaign?
Well, let me say this, Cenk, that in January, when this was the 15th Congressional District, all of the candidates took a pledge that we would not take any corporate PAC funding. We stood before about 300 people, and we unequivocally said that we would run on a progressive platform, that we were going to run a very clean, ethical campaign and not take any corporate PAC money. And I was a candidate that actually ran on that ethical platform. We raised about $450,000, all grassroots. So everything that we did was based upon grassroots efforts, from the amount of money we raised to our volunteers to the way that we ran field. We put about 80% of our budget in running field. We expanded the electorate. And we ran, I really think, even to this day, we ran the best congressional campaign that this district has ever seen. We lost by about 3,500 votes. It's hard to quantify how much of that came from super PACs, but undoubtedly, when outside groups get involved in tipping the scales, that certainly plays a role in the outcome. But I'm absolutely proud of the race that we've run. These volunteers have come together. I heard in your last segment, you were talking about people over party, and these individuals have said, Greg, what's our next step? What are we going to do to ensure that democracy stays in place in the 7th Congressional District? So we are giving some serious thought in using this campaign to build a platform for truly advocating for progressive policies that expand the electorate and ensure that we elect a progressive in both sides of Congress.
So I want to talk about that in a second
Sure.
as well. But one last thing about the money. And by the way, for Emily's List, it's big news when they support a progressive candidate rather than an establishment candidate. It's surprising, or when they support a progressive instead of a incumbent. Like, if they support Marie Newman because Dan Lipinski is against abortion rights, right? And is pro-life, et cetera. That shouldn't be big news if that's their real mission. But
Right.
So you get a sense that no, this is not really about the issues as much as it is we're just going to support the people in power. So, but let's not just talk about that. When you take the 700,000 from them and the no labels, et cetera, how much PAC money do you think was spent in your race?
Oh, easy, about $1 million. Easy. About $1 million of PAC money was spent in this race. And the thing that's so disappointing, Cenk, is that if we look at the mailers that were spent, we've got 77 municipalities in the 7th Congressional District. 22 of those municipalities have people that make, an annual per capita of less than $20,000. That means that each one of these mailers could have fed about 5 people for a year. That's what's disappointing. The reality is, if we don't do something about getting big money and super PACs and dark money out of our federal electoral process, we are going to be holding democracy hostage. And I absolutely, through this process, I absolutely believe that. That's one of the things that I've learned. If we look at super PACs and how they weigh in, really in mitigating every progressive platform that we have. You know, when we talk about criminal justice reform, we're talking about super PACs and the privatization of prisons. When we talk about public education, we're talking about vouchers. When we talk about, universal health care, Medicare for all, we're talking about big pharma and the healthcare insurance industry. These super PACs are buying members of Congress. And the unfortunate part is everyone has a narrative, well, we got to get in to change the system. The problem is with that narrative is we all know that how you get elected is how you govern. And that's what's problematic, Cenk.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So then let's finish up talking about the future. So you mentioned about fighting for progressive priorities. So how would you do that in the next couple of years? What would be next for you?
Well, I mean, one of the things is we have a lot of issues in Pennsylvania. This is a Commonwealth. Kindergarten is not mandatory. We have no universal preschool system. We've got some of the best colleges in the nation that no one can afford to go to. So we're looking at how do we make our progressive platform around education, around criminal justice reform, around health care, and around immigration. How do we make some of those ballot initiatives so that we can really advance a progressive platform for all people that work in Pennsylvania? And so we're going to be spending the next couple of months talking to thousands of people. As I said, almost 12,000 people voted for us. Folks are emailing and calling and saying, what do we do? How can we get involved? We got folks from every walk of life who have been engaged in this campaign, and they want to be activated and motivated and discharged really to advance an agenda that's going to work for Pennsylvanians. And that's what we really plan to spend the next few months planning. And I'd like to come back on the show and talk about how we can make that a national move. We're working with some other folks to make that happen.
All right, I love it. Yes, so when you're ready, please come back on. Let's talk about the future and how we continue the fight. And as Bernie Sanders said, the struggle continues.
The struggle continues, my brother.
Yes, and you still have my favorite slogan of the whole cycle, though. Any old blue won't do.
Any old blue just won't do.
Just won't do. All right, got to put it on a T-shirt, Greg. All right, thank you for checking in. We appreciate it.